Welcome to the Chasing Brighter podcast.
You're about to go on a journey of self-discovery as we chase a brighter you. Every single week, we will bring you new episodes that will cover everything from lifestyle and tips to more serious conversations about grief, life, and hardships.
Allow this show to be a reminder to always keep chasing a brighter version of you. Let's get into it.
All right, Cal, here we are. We're going to pick our most downloaded episode, and we had two. And the second episode that was our most downloaded episode was episode number 41 that launched January 18th, 2024, Nervous System Regulation and Resilience with Smithy.
Yes. I loved hearing Smithy's story. I think that's one of the fun part about a lot of our guests is really hearing their story and her journey. What an amazing person. I left that conversation wanting to be BFFs with her. She just is one of those people that draws you in and really makes you want to be around her.
Yeah.
She had a lot of great insights just about nervous system regulation. And the one thing that's fun about having this podcast is there's a lot we learn, and there's a lot of people who are on these journeys of not only discovery, but also just like insights and information, especially when it comes to medical stuff that aren't really quite caught on mainstream. I thought she was really on the cutting edge.
Yeah, absolutely. She's amazing. She is a yoga instructor and also a nervous system regulation coach. And really just hearing, again, yeah, like you said, her practical tips and advice, and also her energy and aura was so awesome. So we hope you enjoyed this as much as this episode, as much as we have. Here it is, our Encore episode, Nervous System Regulation and Resilience with Smithy. In today's episode, Kelly and I talk with Stephanie Smith. Stephanie is a yoga instructor and 22-year Las Vegas resident. Stephanie, known as Smithy, discovered yoga late in her professional dance career when she realized her body wasn't loving the stage life as much as she did. What originally started as a method to strengthen and maintain her body became a deep love of the practice. When she was offered the chance to attend yoga teacher training, she rolled up her mat and leapt in feet first. Training taught her there was so much more to yoga than she ever thought, and she couldn't wait to share the practice with others in a meaningful and approachable way. After completing her yoga teacher training, Smithy became fascinated with the nervous system in relation to grief, trauma, and stress. She dove right into the vital role yoga plays in the process of moving through difficult experiences and rebalancing the nervous system. Today, she loves nothing more than helping others heal, restore, rebalance, and tap into the power of play through the practice of yoga. We've been focusing on the body, and so really just talking about our relationship with our bodies. Sometimes when we go through trauma or things happen in the life cycle, it's like we disconnect our brain from our body, and we want to look at it from a loving, healing perspective of how can we develop and create a healthy, loving relationship with ourselves and our body. What do you think has brought you here to this moment?
Trauma.
Yeah.
Just a combination of everything. Since I started my yoga teaching journey, which began March of 2020, I started taking a yoga teacher training program. And then once that was done, because of events that had happened in my life immediately prior to starting yoga teacher training, I became fascinated with the human nervous system. And I'm talking about the autonomic side, the side that runs in the background. And I just went down rabbit holes of reading, of gathering knowledge, of taking courses and being fascinated by the information, but then also like really disturbed that I was 43 years old at the time, that at 43 years of age, I hadn't known or been aware of any of this information other than that we had a nervous system, right? That runs in the back. That's all I knew. And I don't want other people to be in the dark like I was in the dark for 43 years. Like, why don't we know this about our stuff, about our nervous system, about our bodies, about how to reconnect with your body, rewire your nervous system, make it more resilient? So then that kind of led me to where I am now as a yoga instructor who is nervous system heavy in their practice and teachings and incorporating that into my teachings. But it did begin with a traumatic event. I think that we don't ever evolve to our higher selves without that kind
Yeah.
of push off the cliff. So that's how I ended up. That's a short version of how I ended up where I am in this moment, teaching yoga from the point of the nervous system and also doing a little bit of nervous system resilience coaching here and there when I can.
And I didn't know this is so funny, right? So I know you from Pilates Plus,
Mhm.
and you present to me someone who is so zen and has been like you were out of the womb doing downward dog. Like you were telling me that you were so new to this. I'm like,
Yeah.
what? You just come in this little, I don't know, just zen and calm and in tune with herself. So you were a professional dancer?
Yes. I was a professional dancer. So I grew up dancing. Obviously, I started at a young age. I think I was 6 or 7. And then I went to Collar University in Toronto and I took a fine arts program, majored in dance. Immediately out of that, I began performing overseas on cruise ships. And then I eventually moved here. And I've been here for 22 years now. But yeah, I was a professional dancer. And no, I was not Zen out of the womb. A lot of people who have known me for a long time would giggle hearing you say that I seem so Zen
Yeah. Yeah.
because being in tune with myself and where I am now has only happened in the last 3 years, 3.5 years. What I started really diving deep into the nervous system in like October 2020.
How
Really
young
only
were
been,
you when you started dancing?
whew, I was like 6 when I started taking dance lessons, and I stopped dancing professionally when the pandemic happened. That's what retired me, which was fine. I was 43 and ready to retire. I just hadn't pulled the trigger.
That can be so punishing on your body. Now, I have one daughter and she took dance, and the studio that she was at, the woman openly talked about breaking cycles
Mhm.
and how she was treated. And she was, I would say, abused as a dancer, where like they couldn't take water breaks or like
Yep.
or just think like they would be locked in the room. And so, were those some of the things that you were exposed to?
So I didn't experience anything quite that harsh from my teachers, thankfully. But once I got into the professional world of dance, that's where it became toxic.
Okay.
Usually from the people I worked for, like the producers, and then occasionally fellow cast members could be quite toxic. And I'm not saying that's everyone I worked with.
Sure.
Usually most of the cast was happy. We had great times, but there's always those 1 or 2 people who are just toxic. But like I said, it was usually the people I worked for, the people running the show, the people,
Yeah.
the producers and stuff. And so that's where the toxicity came in for me, not from my dance teachers, thankfully, but I know that does happen and that does
Yeah.
exist. It's getting better, but it does
And it
exist,
sounds like that
which,
would be shocking because 'cause you'd be, like, early 20s, dancing 20
mhm,
years already at this point, entering the professional field, and then getting hit
yeah,
with
yeah,
that, and what when you say toxicity, unless you're not comfortable
no, that's fine.
diving more into it, but what does that look like then? What how would that kind of play out?
It means pitting cast members against each other. So constantly being in fear for your job because producers they have their favorites and then their favorites are no longer their favorites. A new favorite
Mhm.
comes in. And so that causes competition between, or can cause competition between cast members, never feeling like you're good enough. So let's say you're in a show and you have a solo, right? Like you're responsible for doing the solo number and you do it for like a year. And then all of a sudden the producers are like, we think we want to have somebody else do this. And then you start to doubt yourself, that kind of stuff. New cast members come in, and like I said, they're the new favorite. And so then you're questioning whether you're being pushed out the door. And that's a terrible feeling, right?
Yeah.
That's your livelihood. So they make it, they make you dependent on them because
Yeah.
you don't leave. You stay in this
Yeah.
toxic environment because you're like, I'm only at work for 3 hours a night. I perform for an hour and 15 minutes. What do I have to complain about? Blah, 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 blah. And then on top of that, like if you're a person, so I am naturally thin. My mother was thin, her mother was thin. I have excellent genetics that way. I'm incredibly lucky. So I never, on top of any other toxicity from performing, I never had to deal with the eating disorder,
Mhm.
being
Mhm.
told that I was too heavy or whatever. So I was lucky in that regard, but I'm like the 1%, right? So add on to this competition that's bred between cast members. And then add on if you have to be conscious of your weight all the time, right? And I totally think that's abuse, a mental and emotional abuse there. Shows that do weigh-ins, I really think that's disgusting. If I start to look different on stage to you, then maybe we can have a chat. But if I look the same, you're really going to give me grief over like weighing 2 pounds extra?
Plus, women's bodies fluctuate a little bit too, but that doesn't
Thank you.
matter.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's an abuse and a control thing, right?
Yeah.
Because instead of seeing how screwed up that is, you just become terrified that you're going to lose your job because you're 2 pounds overweight, which might be the difference between going to the bathroom and not going to the bathroom, right? Or
Yeah.
I just chugged a bunch of water and not chugging a bunch of water. Thankfully, I was exempt from that just from basic genetics, but
Do
I
you
have
think
watched so many friends
yeah.
go through the torture of that.
And do you think your family of origin gave you skills? So basically, you're a professional athlete, right? And you're in constant competition for your spot. And which is has to just be so
Yeah.
much stress on your mind and body for a long time. Do
Yes.
you think that your family of origin or teachers or mentors or anything like that gave you tools or skills to be able to handle that level of stress?
No offense to them. No.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm the oldest child, one, and I am a perfectionist. And again, no offense to any of my teachers. My dance teachers they weren't hard on me in terms of being perfect, but I would say that my parents were a little bit. And I had a great childhood. I had a great childhood, right? Like my mother came to all of our dance competitions. My parents were both super supportive of my dance and everything like that. But I still, being the first child, before I even got into dance, my mom wanted me to be perfect, right? And nothing against her. That's, I think, just standard with first
Well, I
child,
think there's a
being a
lot
first child.
that plus there's a lot we now know about parenting approaches and things. There's a lot of information out there.
Yeah.
We often joke, not really joke, but like Jess and I, our mom listens to this podcast and we say things like what you're saying and
Yeah.
sometimes more. And she's like beating
She
herself up.
stopped listening because she said, I
Yeah.
feel like you girls talk about what a terrible parent I was, so I don't want to hear it. And I've told her, Mom, I'm not saying, we're just saying, looking at this lens, right? That was a trauma
Mhm.
to us.
Yeah.
That was a trauma. And so it impacted us. We're saying you did the best you could with what you had.
Absolutely.
But looking back, that might have not have been a great choice for us.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And so my mom passed away in 2004. Thankfully, she's not going to listen to this, but maybe supernaturally she'll get back at me.
The audio will go out.
Yeah,
Mm.
totally. She'll start like shaking the bed or, yeah. But no, I have no ill will, resentment. I know that my parents did the best job they could with the tools that they were given from their parents' nervous systems.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like they were wired by their parents. And I'm sure when they had kids, they're like, I'm going to do a better job. I'm not going to do what my parents did. I'm going to do a better job. And they
Yeah.
did do a better job, but they didn't have the knowledge that I now have of the nervous system and stuff. And I don't have any kids and I have no plans to have kids. But if I were going to have kids, I now have the better set of tools that my parents handed off to me, plus the tools that I have gathered. So maybe that cycle, no kid gets off scot free. All of us are traumatized, even with the best upbringings. We all
Absolutely.
have suffered little traumas. So we don't get off scot free. No kid does. All we can do is do better for our kids if we have kids. And if we don't, then we pass on the knowledge that we learn in hopes that someone will be like, oh, I want to do this better.
Yeah.
And tell us more about even your own, like a lot of what you talked about is your own journey of self discovery.
Yep.
And Jess and I are 18 months apart. We grew up in the same household. We have completely different experiences and
Yep.
different traumas, honestly. And that's a lot of what her and I both have learned on our own journey. I think we're all a work in progress. And
Yep.
how did you, because some of that, it's so hard as a human to flip the script on the things that are well worn paths of feelings, thoughts, or all the things that happen when you face something that you faced off and on over your years and you're like,
Yep.
"Oh, this is triggering for me. I need to stop it. I know this isn't real. I know I need to." But what are some tools that you've learned as you've gone through this and you talk about the nervous system to
Yep.
help yourself break those cycles?
The most important step is to just get to know yourself so deeply, know your triggers. And if you don't know what they are, learn what they are. Basically, the first step, and this is like one of the first steps in yoga and meditation in trying to clear the mind. And I say that in quotation marks because we're humans. It's impossible to do that, is to just notice, is to just become aware of your patterns. It's really hard to change anything if you don't know what you're trying to change,
Mhm.
right? It's really easy to say, I don't want to be like this anymore. But if you don't know why you're like that, if you don't notice the patterns, if you don't notice the habits in your responses, you can't change anything. So the first thing is to notice, to know yourself so deeply that you can make those changes. For example, I have a father he's got Parkinson's, he's disabled, he lives in an assisted living facility, and every once in a while he has an emergency situation where he has to go to the ER. And it took me a few ER visits to realize that I get extremely dysregulated. My nervous system goes into fight or flight. I get extremely dysregulated if I am not fed, if I have not slept well, if I don't vent or talk as if I'm frustrated about the event. So now I have a list in my phone. I know how I'm going to react to his emergency. So the first thing is, okay, feed yourself. Have you eaten? Have you eaten? Okay, that's the first thing you do. If you didn't sleep well the night before, okay, that's too bad. We'll take a nap later. Feed yourself. Call someone you trust and vent about this before you get to your father so that you can be present for him. You can be relatively regulated for him. And that affects his nervous system. And then I can make better decisions for him. So I know those things about myself now. Whereas before I would get a call, they would say he's headed to the emergency room. And I would just hop in my car and I'd run over there and I wouldn't even be allowed to see him for like an hour because they don't get like admitted, all the paperwork. And I would just sit in the waiting room. I started to notice that about myself. And then I adjusted and made a list of here's what you do. Because when you're in those fight or flight moments, your logical brain kind of turns off. So I need a checklist so that I make sure to tick off as many of these boxes as I can so that I don't get as dysregulated. So I can have the reaction in my nervous system, but I respond in a different way.
I go to
So
that and I've been saying it a million times, but the RAIN method. Are
mm,
you familiar with the RAIN method?
I
Like
am, I
recognize.
can't, yeah,
Yeah.
yes,
Recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. And I find myself doing that like 5 times a day because
yeah,
I'm really pissed off. So I mask all emotions with anger. So I'll be pissed off and I'm like, okay, what's really going on? Okay, I'm going to allow myself to be angry. What's really happening here? Allowing myself to be angry, investigating what's that really about? Oh, okay. And then the nurture piece. A lot of times people don't know the nurture piece, right?
Yep.
What will that be? There's so
Yep.
many ways to say it. We can say we're flooded, we can say we're heightened, we can say we're triggered, whatever that is, but it's that self soothing, regulating, whatever you want to call that nurture of being able to know, okay, what do I need to do now? Okay,
Yeah.
I know why, I know what's happening, and then these are the things I need. I love that you have a list on your phone.
I love the list
Yeah, I have
idea.
to. I
It's
have
that's where everybody, just you talk about the rain, but like everyone, as one tries to fix these things, you figure out what tools to use. How did
yeah.
you think about making the list? Did you read something on that, or is that just like you realize that
I
might help?
didn't read anything on making the list. I just did it, but the reason I did it was because of the things I learned about the nervous system.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, when I go into extreme fight or flight, my frontal lobe no longer thinks, right? It's offline. It's not responding. Like I can't focus and think and rationalize and talk to my nervous system with words. So when I get into that heightened state, I need to have a list because then my brain knows, look at your list, right? I can think that.
You've trained your
Look at
brain
your
a little
list
bit to do that.
a little bit in
Yeah.
those situations,
Yeah.
look at the list. Don't try to think of what's on the list. Look at the list. Have you eaten? Yes, I've eaten. Did you sleep well? Not really. Call someone. I even have a list of the people to call because there are unfortunately people who I have tried to call in the past and they're not the right people to call. They
Mm-hmm.
don't offer the
The
support that
support
I
you need.
need,
Yeah.
and I
Mhm.
love them. I
Yeah.
love the people, like, I love these people. I have nothing against them, but I know who my people are. I
Well,
know who to
in
call.
those moments, there's something you need to hear something in a
Yeah,
certain way. And
yeah,
so some people can
exactly.
provide that, some people can't. I
Yep,
love this
absolutely.
because I feel like I'm starting to learn my triggers. Like I just start to feel, I describe like for me, I just start to feel my anxiety just pop up.
Yeah, mhm,
And it's different situations lately. And then there are many situations, like smaller.
yeah, yep,
And so this is really helpful for me because I think that's what I need to I'm starting to recognize the moments and I'm
yeah,
starting to take stock, but I haven't developed a strategy to respond
yeah,
in those.
yeah, and that's why I have those lists, and it was trial and error. Y Being like, "Oh, I haven't eaten, so that might be why I feel like this." Like, "Why am I getting anxious?" So in the morning, like in my mornings, I get up and I have like a pre-breakfast. My stomach is unsettled every morning, so I'll have like a sliced up apple as my pre-breakfast to get things going. And then sometimes I get to doing tasks or work tasks, and then I start to feel scattered. And I'm like, why am I so irritated by everything? And I'm like, oh, because I haven't had actual. Before you attach to this anxiety, before you attach and really start to investigate what this anxious feeling is, go eat. And if you still feel anxious after you've eaten, then we'll address this. And
Yeah.
honestly, 9 times out of 10, it's just because I needed to eat. And it sounds silly, but that is
Makes
something
your
that will
blood
dysregulate your
sugar,
nervous
right?
system.
I know it's so funny. My husband hates raisins. And that's because he gets hangry, and so does one of my 3 children. They get really
Mm.
hangry, and they don't know where. But my mother-in-law used to always carry raisins in her purse
Yeah.
and always have it for him because he would get dysregulated, but now I could never have a raisin again and be fine. But I think about Dominic, my 13-year-old. Kelly knows
Mm.
I was on this hunt for protein drinks because
Yeah.
growing at an incredibly rapid pace,
Oh.
and I think and he's an athlete, and I'm like, "You're hangry half the time, like, just
And
drink this.
hormones.
Drink this." Yeah, yeah, and I'm like, "Drink this and then talk to me." It's like, how can he
Yeah.
intake calories quickly and then you can talk to me?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
because he's not aware of it. He is not aware of
No.
it at all yet, but
Mhm.
hopefully I think that's what we're talking about with breaking cycles and changing things and, like, tuning into our bodies and, "Hey, let's take a
Absolutely.
minute. Just why don't we eat first and then see how you feel, and we can guide others on that journey as well.
Yeah. For like I said, I didn't learn about any of this stuff till I was 43, but I feel like this is stuff that kids should be learning. And I'm not saying they need to read the sciencey books that I've read or that you've read, but just introducing that tuning in to your
Yeah.
body as a
Mhm.
young child so that when they do get old enough to read these books and really understand them, they already have that background of tuning into their bodies and then being able to having the tools like to self-regulate before they become an adult who
Yes.
can't deal with even the smallest inconvenience without their nervous
Yeah.
system spiking through the
Yeah,
roof.
and just go into a tailspin of all kinds of crazy stuff and
Yeah.
sleepless nights and all the things that, at least
Mhm.
for me, that I have been unable to process
Yeah. Yeah.
things. And
I
so
I have struggles with insomnia as well, and I've had to be I finally was like, "I'm done with this," and I got really strict about my sleep hygiene because I knew that the things I was doing before bed and
mhm.
in the mornings were dysregulating my nervous system, which directly related to my quality of sleep.
Did
And
you read
since
Dr. Walker's Why We Sleep?
no, I didn't. I
You can just
didn't, but
we'll
I'll
just
add it
send
to
you
the
we
list.
have a two-part podcast on it. We'll send it to you if
Okay,
I think,
perfect.
but it is like the core so much of what and we what how to be well. It's eat and then sleep, right? He says the number one
Yeah,
thing is what you put in your body and then sleep. And sleep is at the core of everything for sure for
Yeah.
our physical and mental well-being, 100%.
yeah.
Yeah.
I have no coping skills when I am exhausted. I have zero coping skills. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter if I've even eaten. If I am tired, I have no coping skills, right? I just yeah. So I hear you. And I got real strict with my sleep hygiene, and it has made a world of difference. And if I get off track with my sleep hygiene, it immediately presents itself as
Yeah.
insomnia
It's
or
it's
even,
critical. It's so critical. Even my so as my daughter had a test. Was it today? Anyways, she was having a test and I go, "What's number one thing we can do to have to do your bathroom test?" She's like, "Get sleep." And I was like, "Get sleep." I'm
ah,
like, because they know, right? If you look at the research, if you want to perform your best the next day, whatever your performance is, it's sleep. It's
yeah,
just so critical. I think when we're not meeting our basic needs, then we're not in a position to be able to be using those higher levels of our thought process to be able to do the investigation. Engaging our parasympathetic nervous system is so key to our healing process. And why do you think specifically for you, yoga speaks to you? And how did that kind of come about for you?
I originally started taking yoga back in 2015 as a way to maintain the or at least even out the damage I was doing to my body through dancing. And then at some point, it was only like 2 or 3 months into my yoga journey, I realized that it wasn't about the physical practice of yoga. Yes, I was doing that,
Mhm.
but that wasn't what was changing things about me. It was that it turned my brain off. Focusing on the physical practice turned my brain off for an hour and a half, however long the class was. And it enabled me to be still in my body. Even though I was moving,
Mhm.
it just stilled things in my mind. And I was like, oh, this isn't about the physical body. This is about like the mental, the emotional, like the spiritual body. Like this is what yoga is. So that was my first inkling that yoga was a lot more than just the physical practice. And then, of course, when I got into teacher training, they really dive deep into that. The physical practice is like 1/8 of what yoga is really about. And also through the nervous system knowledge that I've acquired, you really can't communicate to your nervous system with your thoughts and rationale. The nervous system communicates to your survival brain, which doesn't communicate in that way with words and thoughts and rationalizations and all that stuff. You have to communicate to your nervous system through the physical body, right? Through breath work, through physical activity, through connection with other humans. Those things are all felt in the body, felt in the nervous system. And that's why yoga is just, it encompasses everything. You've got the breath work, you've got the physical activity, you've got the social connection in class. It just checks all the boxes. So that's why like yoga. But easily you could translate that into Pilates, or if you go to a gym or you run with a group of people. For me, it's yoga. Being a dancer, it's almost like doing choreography, right? But it's alignment based and it doesn't injure
Mhm.
you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Very true.
And was that helpful in so you had already been practicing for quite a while, and so was that helpful for you in healing from trauma?
Oh my God. It was life saving. And that very literally 3 weeks before the pandemic is when this really traumatic event happened in my life. And I actually didn't sign myself up for yoga teacher training. I have an excellent tribe of friends that I didn't realize I had. I knew I had these close friends. I did not realize how valuable they would be in my life. So they all came together, basically saved my life. And two of them signed me up for yoga teacher training. They're like, just show up on next Tuesday, and this is what you're doing for the next 8 weeks of your life. And we practiced 3 or 4 times a week. As the pandemic hit, we eventually took the classes online, but we still practiced every session. We had 3 sessions a week. And that accompanied by the other modules like the yoga philosophy, yoga history, anatomy, all that stuff just saved my life. I was in a very dark place. I was a different person than I am right now. Like when I think about that poor girl I was almost 4 years ago, I just want to hug her and be like, I promise everything is going to be okay. Just wait. Just wait.
Was your instinct to isolate and pull
Yeah.
in then?
Yep. Yep.
Mhm.
I had and again, I had a tribe of friends who wouldn't let that happen. I
Think
had
about
to
how damaging and horrible that would have been going into the pandemic and you just sitting
Yes.
by yourself and no
yeah,
one knowing what was going on with
absolutely.
you.
Absolutely. It would have been I don't know that I would have been here today, but like I said, I had a tribe of friends who wouldn't let that happen. I moved in with a friend of mine, but for the first week after this event, I had to wait for her to come back into town so that I could move in with her. So I stayed with another friend of mine who literally made sure a human being was with me 24/7, which means she slept with me at night. And then if she had to go to work the next evening or whatever, she made sure that somebody was in the house with me. Like, I don't even know how I would repay that to these people other than paying it forward to someone else in this
Yeah.
situation, which is what I wanna do with all this information and all this
Right.
knowledge I have with the nervous system. But yeah, the pandemic actually ended up being the best thing for me
Yeah.
because when you go through trauma, when you experience grief, a devastating loss, or anything like that, all anyone wants is for the world to stop.
Yeah. Mm.
Stop, let me heal and process, and then I'll get back on this ride. But that almost never happens. I just happened to get lucky that the world came to a literal
Yeah.
halt so that I
Yeah.
could stop and heal and process.
And
Most
I
people don't
think
get that opportunity.
that reinforces all of our listeners, and Kelly and I have talked about this a little bit, but like when something happens to someone we love, we don't know what to do. And
Mhm.
so we send a text and we say, let me
Yeah.
know if you need anything. Force your way in a respectful
Yeah, of course.
way of like forcing your way in. So I give an example of our friend Teresa. We lost her sister last year, and she was like, I'm a mess, don't come over. And I was like, okay, so I'm gonna just come by your house and I'm gonna drop off a coffee and I was like, I'm gonna sit on your porch. And if you want to open your door, you can open your door, but don't open, you know what I mean? And it was like, that felt so good because in the past I've done the like, text me if you need anything, and that didn't feel right with me.
Yes.
And Kelly talked about a friend who experienced loss and how she shipped them, like they were out of state, and like, shipped them groceries and little things to care for themselves. But I think that reinforces we are social creatures and we need to be around others. And so when we know someone's hurting, you can provide help and support again in a loving way. But like our instinct is to isolate, which is the opposite of what we need.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fine to curl up in a ball and hide under your covers if that's what you need. But also, after a while, the brain, your nervous system just stays in that state and forgets that
Yeah.
it needs connection. And then
Mhm.
not only does it forget that, you are unable to reach out for connection, right? And then I agree with you though. The ask, okay, just let me know if you need anything. I don't know what I need. I'm
Right.
grieving. I literally
Yes.
can't even tell you what I need right now.
Yeah.
And I did have a couple of people when I was going through that, like in those first few weeks would be like, "Hey, let me know if you need anything. What can I do? What do you need right now?" And I would be like, "I don't know. Why are you asking me?
Yeah,
I don't
because it
know."
puts because what that does, and I think I had read something, it then that's putting on your plate. So you're already
Yeah.
overwhelmed and don't know what to do, and then they're tell me what to do, so that goes on your to-do list of, "Oh, I need to tell them
Yeah.
what to do
No,
and how
like
to help
just
me."
do something. And so
Right,
um
right.
now it's just I'm going to come over and I'm going to sit in your house.
Yeah,
And I'm just
yeah,
gonna be here. You don't have to
right,
talk to me. Go be up in
right.
your bed, but I am in the
Yeah,
house,
yeah.
right? I'm in here, or I'm sending you groceries. I'm sending you food. And I have another set of friends, this couple of friends, they live in New York. And if they know I'm having a difficult day, like with my dad, like if something's emergency room visit or whatever, they literally text me and they're like, "We're ordering DoorDash for you. Do you want this one or this one?"
Oh,
Because of course they have my favorite restaurants listed and
yeah,
they're like, "We're
yeah,
sending you DoorDash."
yeah.
It's and that stuff is just so helpful because again, when you're in those states, whether it's like super high activation
Mhm.
sympathetic nervous system or you're super low activation where you're depressed and shut down, your thinking rational brain isn't online. So when people ask you questions, you're just like, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't answer that.
I really feel like I was just running around for the first, I don't know, 40 years of my life, heightened and totally emotional. I read the book Sensitive is the New Strong, and it was about being an empath, and I
Mhm.
think I was just absorbing everybody's energy and just running
Yes.
around, and everyone was saying I was so emotional and so sensitive, and I didn't have the tools to be able to bring myself back down to
Yeah.
homeostasis. You had mentioned that you were doing yoga instruction, and then what else did
Mhm.
you say you were doing? Some kind of coaching?
Nervous system resilience coaching. So
Okay.
basically teaching people how to create more resilience in their nervous system
Okay.
using tools like yoga, meditation, breathing, and also just recognizing, getting in tune with yourself so deeply that okay, I'm going to do this thing. And normally this thing activates me and stresses me out. So prior to that, I'm going to do these things to get myself in a more regulated system.
Yeah.
It's not just recognizing in the moment that you're stressed out, it's knowing yourself so deeply that you know this event is going to trigger anxiety.
Mhm.
And so being proactive. So the
Yeah.
night before, taking a relaxing bath or going for a walk or whatever that is. And then also
Yeah.
having something on the back end of
Right.
that stressful event to regulate yourself. Again, that's important to me. It's not just being able to regulate your response in the midst of it, it's setting yourself up for success before and then helping yourself calm down after or process that response after, right? It's like this
Yeah.
whole cycle
Yeah.
that you have to complete. And
I
yeah.
love that too, because in sometimes those moments you keep mentally reliving things,
Yeah.
right? So maybe that's part of is that part of it too, where if you have this block of time afterwards, it helps
Mhm.
to complete that cycle of
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when I go out of town, I know that when I come back, I'm going to be a little bit out of sorts. So what I do before I go out of town is I wash all the sheets in my bed. I wash my towels. I make my bed. I clean up the house so that when I come home from my trip, I'm getting into fresh, smell good sheets. I have towels that smell good. My house is beautifully clean. And then I make sure when I come back from whatever trip I'm on, even if it's just a couple of days, I have a buffer day or two, depending on the length of the vacation, between coming back from the trip and going back to work and being busy and whatever. And usually one of those days, I will plan to get together with a friend of mine to have that social interaction. So I'm
Yeah.
preparing myself before the trip and I'm preparing myself for when I get back afterwards. And I'm feeling a little bit out of sorts because I've been on this amazing trip or vacation and I don't just want to go back, I know my nervous system well enough to know that if I have to work the next day after a trip, I'm going to get activated. I'm going to be dysregulated. So I take care of myself that way. I set those boundaries for myself.
I
Yeah.
love all these strategies that you have are so great.
It's taken, obviously, I've read stuff and then just incorporated that in my list of how to keep myself from losing my mind when my dad ends up in the hospital. Just knowing my nervous system and not feeling guilty about needing that extra day, right? Because somewhere in the back of my perfectionist mind, I'm like, oh my God, you don't need a day in between vacations. You can just go back to work. It's not like you have that hard of a job, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, but this is my nervous system and this is what it needs. And I'm going to give it what it needs.
You've talked about deep breathing, you've talked about yoga. What are some other things? We're busy moms and we're stressed out and we're driving and we're in fight or flight. What is a quick thing maybe we can do to engage our nervous system?
Maybe don't do this in your car.
I do a lot of stuff I'm not supposed to in the car. Like when I listen to a meditation, they're like, don't do this in your car.
Just
I'm
while
like,
you're driving. Yeah. I like grounding techniques.
okay.
I like grounding techniques. It's so literal. It's exactly what it sounds like. So if you're sitting somewhere, and honestly, you could do this while you
You could get
drive.
out
I
of
don't
your
know that
car
advice.
just while
If
you're
you get
sitting.
out, yeah, and just sort of feeling the surfaces. If you have your feet on the floor and you're sitting in a chair, so your feet are touching the floor, the backs of your legs are touching the chair, your back body is touching the chair, maybe your arms. And so starting maybe from your feet and working your way up is a good way. Just feel the surfaces under your body. Feel how they feel. Are they firm? Do they have some give? And then work your way up. I'm sitting on this chair. It's soft. It's got some give. It feels velvety. So, like literal grounding, like noticing the sensations and the surfaces under your body. An exercise I really like to do that works for me is noticing sounds. And I start off by noticing the sounds that are closest to me, like maybe my own breathing. And then I notice a sound that's a little bit further away. So maybe like my dog's breathing, or if they're chewing on a toy, I'm noticing that. And then I notice a sound a little bit further away. So maybe my Amazon Alexa Echo thingy is playing music quietly. So I listen to that. Or maybe I notice the dishwasher. And then gradually I start to try and hear sounds farther and farther away. And I see how far away I can hear a sound, right? So I'm using that sense to get myself back into my body, back to any kind of sensation or sense in my body. So those are quick things. If you need to get your frontal lobe back online, I've heard this technique. I haven't used it yet, but just thinking of rhyming words. So
Hmm.
words that rhyme with cat, and then just trying to get that frontal lobe thinking again. Or what was the other one? Oh, listing like president names or state capitals names, just something that's not super difficult, but that you can do by rote that gets that part of your brain online. One of the one of the suggested exercises was to count backwards from 107s. And I was like, I got to 93 and now I'm stressed out because I hate math. So this is not one that's going to work for me. I'm
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
193. That's it. I'm done.
Yeah.
And like I said, not everything works for every single person
Yeah.
and not everything works for every single person every time. It's finding the things that work the most often for you, but then noticing that this might not work in this situation. So if I'm doing the rhyming thing and I still notice that I'm anxious, it's not working. So I'm
Yeah.
going to move on to breath work, or I'm
Right.
going to move on to grounding, or I'm going to call a friend.
Yeah.
That's one of my biggest things that I use. One of my biggest tool is calling somebody. I have a
Yeah.
couple of friends where I'm like, can I call and scream? And immediately I just call them and I'm like, oh my God, and this happened and this is frustrating and I'm so pissed off. And they just let me rant and that's it.
Yeah.
And then it's out of my body. It's out
Yeah.
of my body
Yes.
because I
Yes.
vented
Yes.
and I've screamed and I've been irrational. And they never say, maybe have you considered none of that? They just let me scream. And I do the same for them. They'll be
Yeah.
like, I need to scream. And I'm like, call me right up.
Yeah.
And it makes a huge difference because by the time I get to where I'm going, maybe this frustrating situation is still frustrating, but I have gotten some of it out of my body. And so I have
Yeah.
regulated myself with somebody else's nervous system.
Yeah, I think that connection is so key. I used to work with abused and neglected children, and I would my husband is like Kelly, and he wants to live in a land of rainbows and unicorns, and he doesn't want to hear
Yeah.
it. But our mom is a nurse, and so I could call her
Yeah.
and just talk a little bit. So that was my routine
Mhm.
on my way home to decompress out of all the really horrible stuff and the work that we were doing. I could at least just
Yeah.
talk to someone to get
Mhm.
it out of my brain, and
Mhm.
also I would process what the hell just
Mhm.
happened the
Yeah.
last 8
Yeah.
to 10 hours
Yeah.
and have that human connection with someone,
Yeah.
to just listen,
Yeah.
and get us a chance to wrap our brain around
Yeah.
what's going on.
Someone
Um,
who's not trying to fix the situation.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Thing I'm hearing is we need to make sure that in our tribe, we've got some good listeners, and if we
Mhm.
don't have some good listeners, that's a new friend we could be looking for in
Yes.
2024 is a good
Love
listener.
that.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
What are some tips for some of us that maybe wanna get started in with a yoga practice?
Just do it. Take the leap. But if you are really intimidated by the thought of walking into a class, private lessons are the way to go. Initially, I really, not that I want to detract from private lessons because they are really helpful and really good because they are one on one. But I really think group classes are so beneficial for that social interaction. You're literally regulating your nervous system with 8, 9 other people in the room
Yeah.
who are like minded people. They're there for maybe not the exact same reason you are, but for the mental health benefits of yoga. And you just develop a community that way. So find those places. If
Yeah,
you're intimidated, set up a couple of private lessons where you can just say, hey, I am brand new to yoga. Can you teach me the terminology? Can you teach me the basics? Can you help me practice for my own anatomy,
yeah,
right? Not
yeah,
for handstand person's anatomy or Cirque du Soleil person's anatomy.
yeah,
And that way, when they get to class, they'll hear the terminology. They're not going to memorize it right off the bat, even from a
yeah,
first few privates, but they'll hear Warrior One and they'll be like, oh, yeah. Or they'll hear Warrior Two and they'll be like, I remember what this looks like, kind
yeah,
of.
yeah,
So that can be really helpful because I think half the problem is walking into a class and you hear all this terminology, and a lot of yoga teachers will use Sanskrit alongside of the English words, but it's still intimidating to
mhm,
hear a different language that no one really
yeah,
speaks anymore. And then to see all these people in the room who are practicing, who look like they're advanced or maybe they are advanced, that can be really intimidating. Take a friend with you. Take a friend with you
mhm,
who either is a beginner as well, or find a friend who has done yoga before and then go to classes with them a few times and then have them show you some yoga postures.
Mhm.
This is what Warrior One looks like. This is
yeah,
what Warrior Two looks like. Anyone who's starting out in yoga,
yeah,
tell the yoga teacher, I'm a beginner. These are my issues. I've had knee
mm,
surgery, or I've had neck surgery, or I have chronic low back
mhm,
pain.
yeah,
And a good yoga teacher will know absolutely how to
Yes, that's
suggest
a great point.
different
Yep.
shapes, different postures, right?
yeah,
Modifications of things.
mhm,
There's different things. Like I said, yin restorative, there's gentle flow, which is like vinyasa, but really
yeah.
gentle. Yeah, there's yoga for everyone and everybody, and you do not have to be flexible.
This was so good. I don't know if you're experiencing that way, but the nervous system is getting like a lot of buzz right now. People are talking about it so much more now. And us in the mental health field, we've been talking about it for a long time. And I love that this information is getting out there. Our body is holding on to stuff, right? And
Yes,
our brain may not know it. And so we've got to care for our body and love our body. That is the journey that we're talking about is self-awareness.
absolutely. Being
Yeah.
responsive in the moment and not reactive, right? Taking a beat or two,
Yeah.
knowing what's going on in your nervous system, being like, okay, I'm angry. That's how my nervous system is reacting, but I'm not going to respond the
Yeah.
way that my nervous system is maybe wanting to respond. I'm going to take the time to think about how I want to respond.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. And that's how you begin to rewire your nervous system, build new neural pathways instead of just, like you said, walking around and reacting, knowing that your nervous system is reacting this way. But then deciding your response because you've taken 15 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute, giving yourself
Yeah.
some space to decide your response rather than letting your nervous system decide your response.
Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time
Thank
to
you for
join us
having me.
today.
I
This
could
has been
talk about this stuff
awesome.
forever.
I know. Me
Yeah.
too.
Thanks for listening today. Don't forget to subscribe so you can hear our latest episodes as soon as they drop.
If you love today's episode, please share with another mom. If you want to know more about Kelly and I, want to find more of our blogs, tips, tools, resources, check that out at chasingbrighter.com. Thanks.